We have Paul Cartwright with us. Excuse me here. Paul is going to talk with us about how a pair of veteran prospectors who had not had much success met up with a British adventure seeker and a guy from Iowa to become our founding fathers here in Helena. Paul has completed a manuscript on the urban renewal era in Helena, and now he's working with publishers to get that book out into your hands. And if you're from Helena, you may also know him as a former city commissioner.
All right, now we're going to do tech now because we didn't have time to set it before. The mic sounds good. For those of you who haven't been in here, the lights are what they are, so I know in the back it's going to be a little washed out, but this is what we got. So the fun thing about doing history is there's always rabbit holes you can go down. I believe there's actually a session on that earlier this morning. So as she mentioned, my research is, area research is urban renewal in Helena, which was half a century ago. But to understand Helena during urban renewal, you have to understand Helena started as a mining camp, and to understand the mining camp, you run into the four Georgians. And these were the guys who, in 1864, discovered gold in Last Chance Gulch and made Helena happen. So if you're from Helena, you probably already know a couple things about them, I hope you do. First of all, it was them who named Last Chance Gulch. It wasn't Hollywood, it wasn't Chamber of Commerce. These guys did it. Second of all, most of the four Georgians are not from Georgia. So what I'm going to talk about today is how they got to their last chance and how they became honorary Georgians all around. So if you go out on the internet, you can find this picture. It's described as a possible picture of the four prospectors known as the four Georgians. So there's something wrong with this picture. I'm not going to do a pop quiz, but take a second and see if you can figure out what the problem is. And somebody knows, so keep their mouth shut. See, what's wrong is the picture itself. There weren't a bunch of photographers sitting in a gulch waiting for prospectors to show up and start digging holes. What this actually is a publicity still from a movie that the Chamber of Commerce did make to promote urban renewal. It was released back in '74, I believe. It's called Helena, City of Gold. If you go out on to YouTube, you can find it if you want to. There are four locals playing the four Georgians. So I don't want you to be, I don't want us to be too amused at the people who take this seriously, because the accepted story of Last Chance Gulch has a lot of loose ends. I mean, we are talking about four Georgians that weren't Georgians. So here's another picture showing the prospectors. There we go. Yeah, by Shorty Show. The Shorty Show, local Helena artist. The picture actually hangs out in the lobby of the airport. And it depicts the day that the four Georgians arrived at their last chance. And the four Georgians were John Cowan, D.J. Miller, Bob Stanley, and John Crabb. Of course, at this point, they weren't the four Georgians. They were just four tired guys hoping to get lucky. So they had started 1864 as prospectors working the diggings down around Virginia City. That's about 100 miles south of here. Their journey to the future Helena started that May. There had been some rumors of a big strike up in Kootenai country, not our Kootenai, but up in British Columbia. So it's about 400 miles northwest of Virginia City. So they headed out. Cowan and Miller were in a large group, probably including his friends and relatives, Cowan's friends and relatives. Stanley and Crabb were traveling by themselves, just the two of them. So they linked up on the Clark Fork, and I do hope this is visible in the back. There's a red line down there that's the route they took from Virginia City to the Clark Fork. And it's my best interpretation of the trails that existed in those days and some of the writings that they left behind. I put some of the towns on the map to orient yourself, but remember, only Virginia City existed back then. So by the end of May, they were camped together on the Clark Fork, both groups and a bunch of other prospectors. They were probably someplace between Bearmouth and Clinton, maybe, so they're less than half the way to British Columbia. So while they were camped there, a party came back from the Kootenai country and said, it's played out, don't bother. Most of the prospectors turned around and headed back to Virginia City, which was at least a sure thing. But the future Georgians decided to keep searching. They had enough flour, they had enough supplies, they didn't want to go home empty-handed, so it was on the banks of the Clark Fork that they became a foursome. It's not Georgians, but they were four. Stanley told Cowan, Miller, and Crabb that the previous fall, when he was coming into Montana from Minnesota, they crossed the Mullen, got to the Little Blackfoot. Somebody in the party did a little panning for gold, found color, which indicates gold. It's not enough that's worth mining, but shows there might be something down the way. So that's where they headed. They backtracked on the Mullen Road to where Elston is now, went up the Little Blackfoot. They dug holes, had no luck, so they headed across the divide. This is south of where McDonald Pass is today. And they promptly got lost. This is one of them writing later. They were without a compass or a clue. They stumbled around trying to figure out which way the Missouri was. That was going to be their orientation. This went on for a couple days. Finally, the clouds lifted. One of the group was able to climb a mountain. It's probably Stanley. And he could see the line of the Missouri River. The cottonwoods would pick it out. They didn't say what mountain they climbed. One guess is Red Mountain up by Rimini. Another possibility is Old Baldy, which is by Scott Reservoir, a little south and west of there. Anyway, they got to the 10-mile, what we call the 10-mile gulch, and came into the valley, which then was known as the Prickly Pear Valley for the Prickly Pear Creek. They stopped by a little stream, and Crabb did some panning, found color. Again, nothing worth pursuing. So they headed up the Rocky Mountain front, almost to Glacier, which wasn't there yet. They didn't find anything. Well, they found a mess of grizzlies. Stanley has a funny story about being chased by grizzlies on the Sun River. Probably funnier now than it was at the time. So by the time they got back to the Prickly Pear Valley, they'd been on the trail for 2 months or more and covered, I'm guessing, something like 700 miles, and they had nothing to show for it. So as they were coming back to that little stream where Crabb had found color, they told each other, boys, this is our last chance. You know, who knew Hollywood was so accurate? So this was mid-July, according to Stanley, on or about July 15th. So they made camp, and that evening, after dinner, Stanley walked up the creek, found a likely-looking spot, dug a hole down to bedrock, got some of the gravel, went up and panned it. And he liked what he saw. After all they'd been through, seeing those nuggets, hearing that sound must have been pretty refreshing. So with that, the four despondent prospectors became the Discovery Party. And then they still had ways to go before they became Fort Georgians. So they were a pretty odd collection. They were thrown together by chance in the gold fields. They were miners at the moment, but they'd been other things before. Most of them became something else afterwards. Prospecting was just an interim in people's lives for most of them. So Stanley is the best known because he wrote the letters, he wrote the newspaper articles. It pays to publicize. So he was English. In 1864, he'd gone by the name Bob because to everybody, including him, his real name, Reginald, was, as he said, too sentimental to suit the buckskin period of Montana. And, you know, you got to agree with that. So Reginald, or Bob, had just turned 26 when he discovered gold in Last Chance. He might have been the youngest of the four Georgians. What you see here is a picture of him much older. Again, he wasn't posing in the gulch when he showed up. So he was the son of a minister in England. He'd been educated in the classics, yet he had a respectable background. He'd come to the U.S. in 1857, by his words, seeking travel and adventure. Just some young kid bumming around the world. But for 6 years, that travel and adventure consisted of trapping and logging in Minnesota. Who knew? It wasn't until 1863 that he headed west into prospecting. And then 3 years later, he goes back to England, a rich man. Nice work if you can get it. So when he returned to Helena in 1863, he was greeted warmly. Some people remembered him. And then after that, he kept up a correspondence with the Society of Montana Pioneers right up to his death on July 18th, 1914. I guess when they got word that he had passed away, the flags in Helena were lowered. They still remembered who he was and what he had done. He wasn't that respected, in 1864. He had been the first recorder of claims in the district for the first 3 months. And then in a meeting in October when the diggings organized themselves into a city, the city of Helena at that time, now Helena, Captain George Wood, was elected to become clerk of the district. Stanley must not have stood out. There was a memoir written much later where all the guy writing the memoir could remember is that the clerk was a youngerly man of the Cowan party. Doesn't sound like somebody that stood out much. People did remember John Cowan, probably because many took him to be the leader of the group. We don't know much about him or the other two because, unlike Stanley, they didn't write. So always write notes. So I don't have a picture of Cowan, but this is what he did with his gold dust. He went back home and opened a mill. More recently, he became a failed restaurant and is now an event space. He was the only Georgian in the four. At 46, he was the oldest by far, and he had prematurely gray hair, so he looked older still. He was experienced at prospecting and had been in Colorado following the Pikes Peak rush of 1858. Then he's said to have been there were a whole mess of Georgians working out of Leadville on what was surprisingly enough called the Georgian Bar, and he was supposed to have been down there. He left Helena in 1866 along with Stanley and Miller. He went home to Acworth, Georgia. He built this steam-powered flour mill. Then in the 70s, he came back to the Black Hills for that rush. Didn't get lucky that time. Went back to Georgia, died there in 1900. And though he'd apparently never returned to Helena, word somehow got, and there was some articles in the paper about the passing of another founder. So D.J. Miller was the other Southerner of the group. He, too, left Helena in 1866 with Stanley and Cowan. They went to Philadelphia to have their gold minted into coins. And then after that, he went back home to Alabama. He raised a family there and was doing poorly at farming when he was last heard from. He had been 33 or so at the discovery. So he's younger than Cowan, but older than the other two probably. And he was experienced. He'd gone to California in the early days in 1850, 1851. So this is what we know about John Cobb. He was from Iowa. Who else famous was from Iowa? Captain Kirk of the Starfleet. But Stanley described him as pleasant and hardworking. Crabb had pretty strong Union sympathies, and that could be one of the reasons why that first winter, before the Gulch even really got going, that he sold his share of the discovery ground. Sold it to Miller and two of Cowan's nephews. He thought he'd do better taking up a claim on Nelson Gulch, which is about 5 miles west of here. It wasn't. He returned to the States, bounced back to Helena in the spring of 1866, and then that's the last we hear of him. So that's what we know about the prospectors themselves. They are not immediately the group that you would vote most likely to discover gold. Of course, prospecting for gold is a pretty unlikely business all around. For instance, look at where they found gold. The gulch that was their last chance was not out in the middle of nowhere. It was not like trackless wilderness. The discovery site was 7 miles from what we now call Montana City, and that had been a gold camp for 2 years already. Maybe a 2-hour ride from Last Chance to Montana City. I mean, you could go over for coffee and get back for a full day's work. And if they'd gone to the hills above their discovery, the 4 Georgians could have seen smoke from the ranches and farms along the prickly pear that were providing the miners there. The path that connected Montana City to the wider world ran right across Last Chance Creek. It went to the Mullen Road, which was the main route across the northern Rockies from Fort Benton to Walla Walla, Washington. And this is just my best guess, but it's based on maps from 1868 and then some assumptions about topography and willow tangles and all that. To orient yourself, this is where we are right now. Here's a close-up. So it went pretty close to where we were sitting. And if I have it right, the trail ran only about 3/4 of a mile from Stanley's discovery. Wherever it was close enough to Montana City, the Montana City Trail, that the first day they had the sluices running. They had friends stopping in for after dinner, I guess for dessert, I don't know. Jerry's horses had strayed when he camped for dinner, and he went looking for them, found the 4 Georgians, and they came on in. So this was a busy place. Montana was emptier than it is now, but it was far more people were traipsing around than most of us imagined. But in spite of all the crowds, people quickly forgot where in the Gulch gold was discovered, and most of them probably never knew. There have been plenty of theories. Suggested locations range from up by the Lewis and Clark Library down to Lawrence and Fuller. Each has their own set of eyewitnesses who were absolutely convinced they'd seen the 4 Georgians there. So you don't need pictures on the internet to come up with stories. The most famous theory was from 1920. The Historical Society of Montana and the Society of Montana Pioneers decided to settle the question about the discovery for once and for all, so they appointed a commission. That's how they worked back then, too. And I'm going to need Tech to come over and raise this a little bit for me, because I'm not sure which button to push, but I'll keep going while he raises that. The commission concluded the discovery was under, how do you do this? Oh, that's so cool. It's not fun working with somebody else's computer. Anyway, they decided the discovery was under the gold block in the heart of downtown. That's just a little bit south of 6th Avenue. And the mining claim of the Georgians was declared to run north from there. So it would go under the power block, owned by U.S. Senator T.C. Power, and then under the Montana Club, a members-only club for the wealthy men of Helena and Montana. So very conveniently having those two located on the discovery. They put up a plaque declaring the commission's findings. It's on the fullest side of the street if you want to go look at it, of the building. And they threw in a bonus by declaring the date the gold discovered was precisely July 14. That's better than Stanley did, who could only guess on or about the 15th. So the reason Helena's birthday is celebrated on the 14th is the independent commission, not the actual discovery. So that the commission's conclusion was basically that Stanley, the guy who found gold, didn't know what he was talking about. So Stanley had maintained that where he found gold was in back of Samuel Hauser's First National Bank. That building is now incorporated as part of the Caldwell building up by the library. This is how it looked during urban renewal. Book soon to be on sale. And it looks this way instead of the little one-story building that Hauser had, because in 1888, a pawnbroker by the name of Uncle Sam Karatowski bought Hauser's bank building, extended it back to what was left of the Last Chance Creek, and added 2 stories on top. It housed his pawn shop, a bar, and apartments. So by 1920, when the commission was searching for the discovery site, Karatowski was gone. Kessler was storing beer barrels on the first floor, and the upper 2 floors had become the Savoy Hotel, a boarding house of dubious reputation. So if you were trying to pick where your town started, this would not be where you would want to point to. And here we go again. Why am I? Apple's much easier. So to be fair to the commission, Stanley had said that the town was hard to recognize when he came back in 83 with all the mining and the city growth. But he had a guidepost. Because when he left town at the end of the summer of 1866, he had sold 2 parcels of land on the Discovery ground. And back then, properties were located by the relationship to other buildings. And the building these 2 parcels were related to was Hauser's Bank. So the bank essentially sets as a, well, that does work, as a monument to where the gold was discovered. And actually that's where we recognize it now. But it's there because Stanley had a real connection to that. And I have a real connection to this. Why are we going here?
Trying to go back.
I'm trying to go back. And it's,
Yeah, that's
okay, yeah. I love this stuff. So, where was I? Oh, yes, there. Stanley had the marker. It really was there. The commission also came up with some twists on who was in the discovery group. They made a bunch of mistakes. Probably the biggest one was calling George Crabb a Georgian and him a strong Union man. But it was natural enough for the commission to try to figure out who was in it because that had been a question practically from the beginning. And now it's locked into. So the earliest published report I could find appeared in 1868, 2 years after the Georgians sold their claim and left Helena. This was a book on the history, resources, and businesses of Montana. And it answered the question of who discovered gold by saying Cowan did. Other speculations followed. It wasn't until 1883 when Stanley came to town with his story that we have got the version that we now have today. But I think it's worth believing because of real estate deeds. This isn't very legible, but I wanted to show you that it does exist. This is a record up in the county office, the deed record. And it's dated August 21st, 1866, declaring that J. Cowan, D.J. Miller, and R. Stanley sold their property in the Gulch. And what they sold was called the Discovery Ground in Rattlesnake District, Last Chance Gulch, Edgerton County, Montana Territory. It's pretty good proof. It's pretty good proof. So this deed and the deeds from the properties that Stanley sold are the reason there's some credibility behind his theory, or his explanation of what happened. So not surprisingly, the deed doesn't have the same kind of information that we would expect today. So this is my guess of where the discovery ground was. So it started 30 feet south of the Caldwell and ran almost to the power block. So the downtown is built on the Fort Georgians claim, the old downtown was. So now the big question, why are these guys called Georgians? And they have been called that from the earliest days. Even the official commission back in 1920 said the group was known as the Georgians. The explanation you often hear these days has the Fort Georgians called that because they used what's called the Georgian method of prospecting. And that method is said to involve digging through the gravel till hitting bedrock, panning the material taken from that level. There is one other less common explanation that's around, that Georgian was an honorific given to prospectors that were experienced and successful. Georgia was the site of the second gold rush in the U.S. back in 1829, and there were a lot of Georgians running around the western gold fields. I'm not happy.
Have the cursor in here. 2 fingers together.
Cursor and 2 finger. It's going to happen again, folks. What can I say? So there is a problem, and not just with the computer. The term Georgian only makes sense if it was a widely used term that miners knew when they were doing Georgian method, or that they were from Georgia. But for a widely used term, it doesn't appear to be very, very widely used. I couldn't find any prospectors called Georgians except in Helena histories. And like I say, there were Georgians all over the gold fields. So it doesn't seem a little weird that our foursomes are the only ones called Georgians? So John White and his party from Colorado fields that discovered Bannock, diggings at Bannock 2 years earlier, they weren't called Georgians. William Fairweather and Henry Edgar discovered gold 1 year earlier down in Virginia City. They weren't called Georgians. And Edgar even left a note in his journal saying, "We dug down to bedrock to get gravel." So why aren't these guys Georgians? Well, yeah.
Next slide.
If people want to come up and just like look over my shoulder, yeah, please. Next slide. It was a lot easier with transparencies. Hey, you kids out there, we did used to use those. Next slide, please. So I can't say for sure, but I think the reason probably is that people like their history without loose ends. And the 4 Georgians without enough Georgians is one big loose end. It certainly cries out for some kind of explanation. So the earliest reference to the Georgian method of mining that I could find referred to a conversation that took place in 1995. That report appeared in 1999 in Montana, the Magazine of Western History. Ellen Baumler, the author, mentions that she had a conversation with Richard Roeder just a month before he died. And Roeder was just speculating about Georgians, he says, and the Georgian method. But, of course, a speculation from someone who wrote Montana, the History of 2 Centuries, is worth listening to, but his speculation is now taken as hard fact. This article was published a year after Google got started. Maybe that's the reason. So here's my speculation of what happened. Within a year of discovery, Helena was a booming town. This lithograph was made in 1865. It's looking from the top of what's now Jefferson Street. And most of the residents were either hired hands or businessmen supplying the miners and the town. So the number of hired hands was particularly high. Placer mining with sluice boxes is labor intensive. Reportedly, the discovery claim had 70 men on payroll at some point. So the cabins that the Georgians occupied are still show up in the creek bed. That's these little here. But the town was growing up around them, and the original miners were no longer the major group. So in the middle of a bustling town, you have the discovery ground. And who ran it? In the months of discovery, 4/5 of the managers of the discovery ground were Southerners. Cowan was from Georgia. Miller was from Alabama. Cowan's 2 nephews, the guys that bought out Crab, they were from Georgia. The 4 Southerners shared a cabin. They even sold building lots together. So for history to decide that Georgians were the ones who discovered Last Chance Gulch, it's not that big a leap. And there's one other possibility. Georgians might have been a catch-all term, meaning the guys who owned the discovery ground. There's an article from 1876 that hints at this. Cornelius Hedges celebrated the 4th of July that year by writing of the history of Helena so far. He called the discoverers a party of Georgians. He also included Stanley as a member of the party. But he probably knew that, could well have known that Stanley was English. Hedges had arrived in Helena just a few months after the discovery. He was a miner and also a lawyer. And he partnered with George Wood. Wood, you may recall, is the one that became the clerk and recorder of the district, replacing Stanley. And Wood was one of the guys holding claim number 1 above discovery. So that's upstream from and right next to the discovery ground. He would have seen Stanley on a regular basis. Presumably he knew that he was English. So either way, I think what happened is in the bustle of a mining boomtown, the facts get lost, just like they did. They got lost back then, different reasons they do today, but they got lost. That's how we ended up with 4 Georgians. Confusion. And it's why, as this computer indicates, why 161 years later, here we are in a town founded by despondent miners who weren't Georgians.